Hello everyone, and welcome back to episode 4 of ISS EDUlearn Ask Me Anything. I am Mike P., your favorite educator interviewer, and I am here with Dana Watts, our Director of Research and Development. Who are we here with today, Dana?
Today we're here with Anne Sidebottom and Gabby Ostrogne. Am I saying that correctly?
Pretty close. Ostrogne.
Ostrogne. And they were our recent facilitators from our ISS EDuLearn course titled The Art of Leading Through Difficult Changes. As we know, change has always been a factor in our transient international school communities, but recent global events have made change even more challenging and impactful than ever. And so they have been guiding us and helping us lead the way and figure out how to navigate these new waters.
All right, and we'll get started. And my very first question has to do with resistance. You spoke a lot about resistance in the two courses that you had. And you also showed a graph that said that mid-level managers and employees that are in the front line are the ones who most likely are the ones to resist. So I kind of wanted to know, how can an organization reduce this resistance? I know you shared a few type of tactics, but just wanted to know which ones maybe is your favorite.
Thanks, Mike. I think that's a great question. I'll happy to kick off and Gabby will join in and chime in where necessary. There's a whole lot of different ways that people resist change or can be seen to be resistant. We've talked through a few different models and ways of kind of thinking about managing it, and essentially trying to really the way of managing it is trying to predict how people might respond and might react, and then trying to address those concerns earlier so that we don't actually find them actively resisting as changes come to hit. There's probably a few different ways that we do that. Gabby, did you want to join in there as well?
Yeah, as always. I think it's a great question, because senior leaders often think about employees as being resistant to change, and yet by the time employees hear about the change, senior leaders have been thinking about it for some time, and staff haven't had the same amount of time to get used to the idea, to talk about it and do those sorts of things. So I think I'm not sure I'm not sure it's actual resistance always. I think it's sometimes we just haven't had the same amount of time as you to get used to this idea. The fundamental thing I think around change is if people understand why. The why is something we all need as human beings. Why are we doing whatever it is that we're doing? And if people understand that purpose and they understand how it links to the ethos of the organisation, or in particular how this is going to be beneficial for students, or how it's going to be beneficial in terms of keeping the organisation going, some of those changes are really, really tough. And of course, humans are going to say, not really on board with this, or I'm not really comfortable because I might lose my job. So it's those sorts of realities, and remembering that people are human, and as Anne said, thinking through, well, how might people respond? You know, where are they at? And the other thing I think about is the minute that you're tired of speaking about change is the very moment they'll start to get it. So you cannot possibly over communicate.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's so spot on. And when you were talking, I was thinking of Simon Sinek, right? And know your why, share your why. And too often you hit the nail on the head when you talked about how so much change, especially within schools, happens behind closed doors. And so it's more that teachers and parents and sometimes students feel like it's being done to them because they weren't a part of the process. Do you have any recommendations on how to make that process more transparent?
Well, I know that it's often, having been involved in, some large scale change, as we say, i.e. retrenchment. People use all that sort of what I call weasel words around being to right size the organisation, all of that kind of crap. I go, people are going to lose their jobs. Let's speak plainly. The main thing I would suggest there is that you can't always share everything, but what you can do is let people know there's a problem, that we're thinking about this at the moment. We don't know what the solution is, if that's the truth. Or you can talk about that there is this issue. I mean, people know, they know that there's an issue typically. They know often that change is needed. If they don't, it's really helping people understand. It's not always possible if I'm thinking about the extreme kind of change where you are doing, going to do retrenchments and so on. It's not possible to consult frontline staff in that instance, but it is possible to talk about we've got a problem. We have declining enrolments, for example, and, unless we can increase those, we are going to have to make some pretty tough decisions. We're working through that at the moment. This is the process that we'll use in order to make decisions. So helping people understand the principles through which you will make decisions and the process. So you can't say who or how, but you can say, be sharing as much as is possible, but in particular, letting people know the principles on which decisions will be made, and that every attempt will be made to be, it's fair across everybody, all of those sorts of things. Sorry, Anne, you...
No, and I was just going to chime in. I think you're absolutely right. Where you can be as sort of genuine and truthful and honest with people as possible. People feel that they know when you're telling them the truth, and they know when they can sense when you're wrapping it up in a different kind of a message. And I think wherever possible, consistent, regular communications, as frequently, as you said, until you're almost sick of saying the same thing. They might finally, generally people are finally starting to understand the message, not because people are slow, but because there's a lot of communication out there and it takes a while for messages to sink in. I think, equally important that people get the messages, are delivered the messages by the right people. So in the majority of cases, people want to hear the message from their direct manager because that's who they can go to and talk about what they're concerned about and understand, well, what does that mean for me? And, maybe we don't know what that means for them just yet, but they can have that direct conversation. If you do see some cases where the message is delivered from either too high up or from sort of a 3 steps removed source, and people have nowhere to go if they're hearing the message that way, and the people around them sort of aren't empowered or equipped with all the messages to speak openly with their frontline, or even senior leadership talking to middle management, really making sure that everyone's equipped with the right messages to talk to their people, I think is really critical.
I would add there, and sorry, Dana, I would add that it is useful to have those multiple levels of communication, as in to have the opportunity for what we'd call a town hall kind of thing, where everybody is invited to a session with, say, the principal or the board or whoever are the people who ultimately make those decisions. It is important that they're available to respond to questions. So you might have a facilitated session. It's often difficult when you're in a group of 50 people, no one wants to ask anything, but you might have someone facilitating that to say, gathering some questions beforehand from people, for example, anonymously. You might do a short, free survey monkey with staff to say, what are the concerns? We'll ask those in a safe way, in a setting. Because sometimes, yes, people want to hear from their line manager, but they also want to know broadly where we are all at. So there's benefit in doing both, because not every line manager will communicate stuff in the same way.
Gabby and Anne, I hear that a solution to the resistance can be transparency. And something that comes to mind is is there something that's too much sharing? Because there is a hierarchy that's there for a reason, right? So in your mind, do you think there's something that's too much sharing? And is all models that do work have employees a part of the decision, the higher up decisions?
I think there is absolutely the idea of oversharing. I kind of think about the parallel with parents and children. So sometimes it's helpful to think about organisations as family systems, and it's not useful and it's not their job as children to think about the family's finances, for example. So you don't say to the kids, look, I'm really worried about how we're going to pay the mortgage. It's similar with employees, not that they're children, but it's not their job to be worrying about that. Their job is to be doing the teaching and the learning and so on. So So it's a burden for employees to know too much because we don't want to burden people with information that will make them feel compromised or that they know things that are going to be difficult, just not useful. So absolutely there is the idea of oversharing, and you have to be very careful about who has access to what information. Not from a point of view of being secret, but from the point of view of really protecting everybody's dignity and also sense of psychological safety. So that's how I'd answer that. Yeah.
I would add to that as well that, and it's sort of the counterbalance to the being transparent and talking about that there's a problem that we're trying to solve. When you're at the early stages, and if it's the real pickle for the board or the leadership team to be solving, being overly transparent about the difficulties that you're facing could just inspire a whole lot of unnecessary uncertainty because you haven't actually got far enough into the problem-solving process yourselves. So sort of oversharing too much about sort of unknown challenges or solutions could certainly throw people into a spiral of their own uncertainty and potentially lose a degree of faith. So I think it's getting that balance of transparency right and respecting the process that you and the senior leadership team need to go through to get to the stage where you are in a position to share and talk about the process that you're going through and the details of the problem. I think that's it's a balance, but there certainly could be oversharing by talking too much too soon and inspiring a lot of uncertainty.
I was thinking if we're not talking about having to reduce the number of staff, if we're talking about a different kind of change where there is a knotty problem that none of us know how to solve, then absolutely that's the right time, taking account of Anne's comments that you don't want to be sharing problems that are really big. But where there are ones that will impact on the safety of the whole organisation, but where there are problems that we don't know how to solve around how we educate kids or the last time we was talking, how do we activate the community? How do we use WhatsApp? All of those sorts of things. That's where you will get ideas from the people who know. So they're the people who are interacting with the kids. They're the ones who are interacting with parents and the community. So it's quite appropriate to consult and to problem solve together. So it depends on the problem and the desired change as to what you would do. And just secondly, on the idea of which model, do we have a favourite model? Anne and I were talking about this in terms of being agnostic around which one. Organisations often have their favourite. There's no point trying to change it. But if they don't, I always advocate for the simplest. Make it simple. We overcomplexify things and we don't need to. So I like to try and think about, if I can't explain it to a child, then it's too complex.
In the midst of changes, are families and students thought of?
Must be. In fact, the way I advocate to any organisation is if you hold at the very centre of all of your decision making the very people you're there to serve, then you can't go wrong. That's it, really.
That's real nice and simple.
One of my favorite expressions I heard a head of school say once, a child had been caught off campus, possibly, potentially in the middle of a drug deal. And so the parents came after the head of school and said, we demand to know the name. We demand to know the name. And I was so thrilled to hear this head of school say, there are no bad children. There are children who make bad choices. And I will protect that child as much as I would protect your child, because that child just made a bad choice. And I think children are always, and the families are always at the heart of so much of what we do in schools. And often hear the expression of like the empty chair in the room. Like you always try to imagine the child or the family in that room when you're making decisions, because school is an extension of home and so much of their community. And we really have to be careful when we're making decisions, because it's going to impact things in their home as well.
Yeah. I think about how I feel about my kids, and you get like a tiger sort of, or my kids go, Mom, don't be like a lion. Because if something goes wrong, I really want to go, what's going on? And all of that. So people feel obviously very passionate about their kids, and the example that you bring up there, Dana, is it's a really important one. That the whole idea of being at school is to learn, and to learn we have to make mistakes, and adults do, and we all do, and it shouldn't be the end. It's important that we have a way of, I would call it, having that sort of reparative, or what is it called? Anyway, one of those conversations, a restorative conversation, that's right. I work with a school where kids have significant behavioural issues and have had extreme trauma and difficult kind of, all sorts of difficult things in government care and so on. And the whole idea is about respect, and that if every child has the right to an education. It's a human right. And so in order to do that, other children need to be allow that child to learn. So it really guides how, what expectations there would be of behaviour, including behaviour of parents. So we hold everyone to the same standard is kind of what I would say, little people and big ones.
That's good. Gabby and Anne, during your presentation, you shared a statistic that was from Harvard Business Review, and it was kind of shocking. And I just wanted to know, maybe you have a response as to why that number is so high, but it said 70% of change efforts fail. 70%.
Fail to realise the full benefit, I think, is what the rest of that sentence is. It might be. Correct me if I'm wrong, Anne. They don't entirely fail.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Gabby. The determination of success is that often for something to be successful, you need to have gotten everyone across that line and doing something differently, or you haven't left half the people behind, or struggling to catch up, struggling to, whether it's adapt to a new way of doing things, or thinking of reasons why they shouldn't do it, or sort of come on board. So I think the idea of success is that you actually fully realize those benefits. And I think the vast majority of change programs never quite fully realize those benefits because they don't bring everyone along with them. I think there'll be the early adopters and the enthusiasts that come along and can see the why. And we're not necessarily talking about sort of sensitive big people changes here, but say, programs whether you're rolling out new curriculum, or changing the timetable, or changing the way that we're doing things within a school, or sort of making some fundamental changes, but it's not necessarily resulting in job losses and the like. You need everyone to come on board fully to realize the benefits that you've predicted for that. And more often than not, you actually don't get all the way there. So it's a dramatic statistic, I suppose. It's used perhaps somewhat for effect to really draw people's attention to the fact that the majority of programs don't get all the way there, but all change programs are justified on a projected ROI and a set of benefits that have been calculated and determined to be realized as a result of that. And right. In our experience, and certainly from the research, the vast majority don't actually get there, or they actually don't. One of the other things that it's areas where they fall over is that they don't actually stick around to measure the benefits right through to the end. So you sort of you finish the project plan, you get to the last task and job done, and you sort of stop following through and reinforcing that some of those changes stick. And particularly if it's behavioural or softer areas, but would have a tangible impact, it is difficult to follow through, and it's very difficult to maintain that momentum once you're sort of at the end of the real work.
Okay, I guess I'll let that statistic slide then.
I would add to that it just brought to mind, and the idea that when you are thinking about implementing change, or you've got a why, there's some change needed, it's really useful, and people often know who they are, to find those people who are most likely to be against it and involve them early.
Okay.
Because they're going to be able to tell you all the things that could go wrong, and you need them. Because they've got, insight for some reason. They have views. So it's good to understand them.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I'd add as well that typically a lot of programs or a lot of efforts to make a change, I think, the reason we call out the the statistic and the failure rate is because so many tend to engage change management as a role or as a practice in the program far too late. They bring it in when the rubber's about to hit the road, and all of a sudden, we need to communicate this to a whole lot of people because no one knows that's coming, and now we've got to train a whole lot of people. And they're kind of the two most basic elements of change management. Whereas if you actually put in the hard work earlier on, that part comes along. But if you put in the hard work earlier on and engaging with the people who could help you bring those people along and help advocate for those changes and help advocate and spread that why and help people understand it, the back end of the program can be much easier. But often those efforts are engaged far too late.
Yeah, position sounds like it should be named disaster management or something.
Is there that saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail?
The 5 Ps.
Pretty much, yeah.
Well, mine is proper preparation prevents poor performance.
Right. That's
a good one.
Yeah.
I like that, Mike.
Yeah. I have one last question that I have before I see time is going. What changes do you guys foresee within the next 12 months? And in the last 3 years, we have seen many changes, but within the next 12, what do you foresee that some schools may need to change?
What I'm seeing here, and I don't have a global perspective, so probably you guys would know this more, Dana, I imagine with your experience as well. But what I'm noticing in Australia is a much greater emphasis on social and emotional awareness and skill development for kids. So therefore, teachers and support staff have to be able to do the same. So being self-aware, knowing how to regulate your emotion, knowing how to work with others. I call it play fairly in the sandpit, not flicking sand into other people's eyes. So it's about, because the world has changed and the sort of work that we do is more in teams. Truly, it probably always was, but, you can't really ever achieve anything by yourself. So helping kids develop the skills to work effectively together. I think there was that thing that was produced a while ago around 21st century skills. So there's a set of competencies that have been defined. And we know that, it's not only useful to have social and emotional awareness just for well-being, let alone working with other people. So that's a real emphasis here. I'd be interested in your views, Dana.
I also think that I'm concerned that I think we're gonna have a teacher shortage. I agree with the social emotional, and I think we're just starting to see the impact of what COVID and lockdown has done to not just our students and our children, but also to the teachers and adults in our buildings and our communities, but then also the impact of all the stress on our sector and our just education in general. And they had to change on a dime overnight and start teaching online. And then they went to hybrid, and then they went back and forth, and then they're going back and forth in between to mask, not mask, and everything else. It's just been a lot on teachers, and it's a wonderful profession, but it's also a demanding profession. And the past 3 years has been incredibly demanding. So I'm concerned about that. How about for you, Anne?
Yeah, I think you're right, and so in general terms, I mean, everyone's seeing a lot more mobility now. I think there was obviously a lot of change in the workforce early on during lockdowns, and for those who perhaps weren't going to be could see that they weren't going to be immediately affected, a lot of people just bunkered down for that couple of years and hung on tight to whatever they were doing or wherever they were. But we're now seeing that sort of almost tidal wave of mobility, and people have now looking for opportunities to move around. And I think, with the flexibility and the increased flexibility and different ways of working that's obviously come out of this, we're also seeing a lot of sort of transferability of skills. So, you might see people crossing industries and changing roles into quite significant roles because, we're sort of looking at everything much more flexibly. So I think, certainly retention and potential attrition of staff is going to be a big problem. I think we've also seen the scenario where obviously when the pandemic hit, most organisations had a pretty full pipe, as most organisations do, have a full pipeline of projects to be delivered, and almost everything got put on hold indefinitely. And I think there's now this sort of okay, let's kind of reset. Where are we? There's some pretty big backlogs there, and there's no more hours in the week or the year to get things done. So this kind of need to be ruthlessly prioritizing what we do, or even thinking really differently about, is that still the right project to get done, or do we need to do this differently or approach it differently? I think, there's a big backlog for a lot of people, a lot of organizations to start tackling. And I think probably a degree of creativity in the way that you tackle that backlog could be really helpful now.
And that brings to mind, I've just done some work with hospitals too around how do you hold on to people if we, and it's about respecting the profession, and how do we make that happen when that's kind of a bigger issue. To your point, Dana, around the difficulties that people have faced and the really big challenges that people have faced all around the world, I've only found that change is possible one person at a time. And sometimes it's very helpful to have over food. I'm always big on, breaking bread. So having a discussion with the community and inviting people in to talk about, well, this is what we've been through. We all have, kids, families and staff and teaching. And so talking about that, and then talking about our plan, what we're looking to do to help us heal and renew is a useful thing to do, just to start and help families think about, it was pretty hard for teachers too. They're just probably not as conscious of it. And the other is for every single leader, if you like, in an organisation to ask some pretty basic questions around, what can I do? What's one thing I could do to help your professional development, or that sort of thing. That HBR, Harvard Business Review, came out with 5 really good questions, which I'll share with you if you like. But that's pretty much what holds people, is that someone is interested in them, someone cares or sees them, and is willing to have some time to talk about them and their future.
Excellent point. Well, thank you both so much. Anne and Gabby, this has been an amazing opportunity to chat with you further. And we've really enjoyed the course that you ran for us through ISS EDUlearn. And it's a part of our ISS EDUlearn passport, where we are trying to meet the needs of teachers, and we're really trying to listen to our communities and see what they need. And this is a workshop. This is our second time running it, because we've had teachers and leaders just say, like, this is hard and we need help. So thank you for guiding our colleagues and helping us all navigate what's coming next, because we appreciate it and we need to help each other learn and grow together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's our pleasure.
Thank
Thanks,
you, guys.
Mark.
Thank
Dana.
you. This is the end of episode 4. You can find us on Spotify, ISS EDUlearn. Ask me anything. Until next time, bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.